Welcome, everyone. I'm Jackie Hillerby, and I'm so happy to be here this Sunday to lead the service. And I was allowed to pick any topic I wanted, so of course I jumped at the chance to do the whole service on the topic of suffering. I've thought a lot about suffering over the last 5 years, and I want to share some ideas with the church congregation. But don't worry, I don't think the service itself will make you suffer too much. We'll start with the acknowledgement of the land. Oh, and also, when something is in, When something is in red print, it's for me to read. When it's bolded in black, it's for everyone to read together. Kincardine United Church takes seriously the commitments made to the First Nations communities through the National Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, especially through the calls to action to churches like us. Therefore, we acknowledge this day that we gather for worship on the traditional territories of the Saugeen Ojibwe and the other Indigenous peoples who preceded them, the original nations of this land, and we acknowledge with respect their history, their spirituality, and their culture. Announcements. There will be a UCW Lighthouse Zoom meeting on Monday, September 19th at 7 p.m., and you can find the Zoom link in the online announcements. Next week is Mission Sunday, when Nan Grant from the Kincardine Food Bank is going to come and talk to you about the food bank, and there are envelopes at the back that you can put in a special offering for the food bank if you would like. The service for prayers of healing has been moved to October 2nd, so everyone please take note of that date. And ARIA 21 presents Journeys, an afternoon of classical song, on Saturday, October 1st at 3. And Kincardine United Church needs volunteers. They're even looking to the schools, so if there are any high school students you know who need volunteer hours, we do that. Nursery, tech crew, and choir can all use some people. Peace of Christ be with you.
And also with you.
Dear God, we come to church each week and sing your praises. We thank you for the things in our lives we are grateful for. When life is full of joy, life itself feels like a gift. And yet, there are many times in our lives when we suffer, when we fail at the things we strive for, when our bodies break down, when we lose the ones we love most. When we suffer, it can be hard to feel grateful for the gift of life. Life feels more like a chore, an obligation, a cruel joke. In our deepest despair, please help us to remember that joy will come again. When we feel alone, please help us to remember our community and reach out to those who will show us your love through their kind acts. And when we feel no connection to something greater, please help us to believe that you will continue to reach out to us with love, so that when we are ready, it will be there for us to feel. Amen. way that generalizes to everyone. And yet, I wanted this confession to be real. I know sometimes we each do our own confessions in our own silent prayers, but I wanted to share with you my own prayer of confession, just in case it helps you with yours. Dear God, I come to church, and I don't always feel a connection to you. I miss the simplicity of our relationship from when I was a child, the awe-inspired innocence that I used to bring to services when I could sing songs of praise with pure joy. The trusting belief in a Santa-like God the Father who could grant my wishes and give me exactly what I wanted out of life, as long as I was good. But the true suffering and trials of life made me question my beliefs. I have had to work through our relationship again and again with feelings of anger, of betrayal, of mistrust, of yearning for a relationship with you, even as I was determined to pull away. Some part of me worried these feelings would lead me to be punished. Some part of me wanted to punish you. Some part of me still knew I was loved, even if I couldn't feel it. But these emotions were part of a journey, and I'm betting you knew that. They led me to search, to read, to rethink. They led me to a different God, a more all-encompassing one than the Santa God of my childhood. A God who is part of everything and everyone, including those who helped pick me up on my journey. I am still on my pilgrimage to make peace with you. It's not over yet, so I'll see you in therapy, or maybe in the wind blowing through the forest trees, or in the hug of a friend, or my children's eyes, or the generosity of a stranger. Please take a moment to commune silently with your God and share anything you want about your own journey toward connection. God has a view of time and space and an understanding of humanity that we lack. And with complete understanding comes complete compassion for our suffering. No amount of raging against our incomplete understanding of God could make God abandon us. No mistake we make in life, due to our human frailties, could make God ashamed of us. A teenager can break curfew and shout, "I hate you," at her loving parents, but the parents still love their child. The parents even know that the teenager loves them and needs them more than she could possibly explain. Whether you feel the connection in church or in nature or not at all, God is with us. We are not alone. Amen. All right, so sharing time. My parents once asked my sister to take care of something very old and very important to them for a couple of days. And she found it harder than she ever imagined and called me in a bit of a crisis. Our conversation ended up being quite relevant to the topic today. Luckily, due to recent technological advances in communication, we recorded our conversation. Here it is.
Thanks for meeting with me. I wanted your thoughts because I know you go to church regularly and you think a lot about spiritual things. And I'm struggling with my relationship with dog.
Yes. Many people feel dogs' love throughout their entire lives. Others question the purpose of dogs' very existence.
Right. Like, does it matter if I love dog as long as I'm acting in caring ways? Does it even matter if dog loves me?
Some people believe that dog is completely loving and accepting. Others feel the presence of a very demanding dog in their lives. I personally believe that you can leave dog for a time, and like the prodigal son, no matter how long or short a time you've been away, dog will celebrate your return.
My parents raised me to have a certain type of relationship with dog. We would sing songs to dog and love dog with a special kind of love you gain to know other. But as I grew up, dog wasn't part of my daily life. I mean, sometimes I would go for a walk in the forest and sense dog's presence, but it wasn't something I needed during the hustle and bustle of daily life. Now it seems like every day brings a new crisis, and there dog is staring me in the face.
Many people reached out for dog during the hardest times of their lives.
But maybe some of those times seem to be dog's doing, like the puddles on my rug and the stains on my couch. What have I done to deserve this?
Sometimes bad carpet stains happen to good people. It doesn't mean dog doesn't love you.
Does it matter if dog loves me if bad carpet stains still happen? What good is it if dog doesn't help me?
Because dog has not left you. Dog is there with you as you get down on your knees to clean those carpet stains. You are not alone.
But what if dog is punishing me? What do I do?
Some people give lunchtime offerings to appease an angry dog. People have been doing that for centuries.
That's true. I could give more to dog. But sometimes I can be in a deep sleep in the wee hours of the morning, and suddenly I receive a message from dog. A message that calls me to action. I try to avoid it like Jonah did, but dog's insistent call forces me to get up and do dog's work.
The call of dog is impossible to ignore forever. Look, I can see you're really struggling, but that's okay. Sometimes it's about the dog walk, not the destination. You think you're going somewhere completely different. Really, you end up right back where you started, just with a new perspective.
I suppose you're right. Dog will always be a mystery, but we'll go on that walk together.
Good luck. Dog be with you.
And also with you.
Thank you. So I know it sounds like that conversation was just a skit that we made up for church, but actually that conversation really happened, almost word for word to that, and we thought we were so funny we wrote it down. All right. Now we will say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. So this reading that we're about to do is from 2 Corinthians 12, verses 10 to 7, and it's written by the Apostle Paul on his visions and revelations. And Paul is the apostle who had the religious conversion on his trip to Damascus to persecute Christians, and ended up becoming a Christian himself and writing 14 books of the Bible and being incredibly influential in spreading early Christianity. So here's Judy Zarubik to read it.
A thorn was given to me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from being too elated. 3 times I appealed to the Lord about this, that it would leave me. But he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness." So I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am content with my weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities for the sake of Christ. For whenever I am weak, then I am strong.
The Bible's full of these opposites, right? Every valley shall be exalted and every mountain made low. The last shall be first. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And now Paul says that it's in our weaknesses and struggles that God's power is made perfect. Definitely something to ponder as we move through the service. Suffering and other uplifting ideas. Although the Bible describes some suffering, like the Israelite slaves in Egypt or Jesus on the cross, I always felt like church services were more about the positive side of life. This was great when what I needed was a reminder of what to be grateful for in my first world life. But it fell short when my son died and I truly felt what it is to suffer. Somehow the songs and prayers didn't resonate with me, and that continued even after I started picking up the pieces of my life. I could feel pretty normal the rest of the week, but I would come to church and feel completely out of place. It was lacking a piece of life that was now embedded in mine, the other half of the equation, pain and suffering. I did a lot of my own reading, talking through theories and pondering. So here's my attempt to bring the conversation here. Harold Kushner is a rabbi who provided pastoral counseling to many people. He grew up with the image of God as a parent figure who would treat us fairly and reward us for obedience and discipline us if we strayed. He was aware that bad things happened to good people, but it never drove him to wonder about God's justice. He figured God must know better than him. But then he suffered his own personal tragedy, the degenerative disease and death of his son at age 11. And he found himself questioning for the first time, this isn't the way the world is supposed to work. How can this be happening? He ended up writing an incredible book called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. No matter how many bad things you hear on the news, it's weird how it's just different when it happens to you. I grew up not even being told that God would discipline or reward me. I understood that the world was unfair, and I tried not to blame victims for their experiences. But the ideas of society permeated my subconscious. My parents always treated me fairly. My teachers and coaches did too. Most of my life lessons had taught me that if I just worked hard enough and tried to be a good person, that would get me where I needed to go in life. That and the odd prayer of, please help me do well on this test. But then my own son died. When I could actually feel the pain of the world, I started asking questions like, why would God create a world that has this much suffering? What is the point of praying if it can't save your child? And what's the point of God if he won't intervene? God the Father? More like God the deadbeat dad. Kushner's book was where I started on my journey to figure it all out. I once talked to a friend who was asking these same questions after the loss of her son. She said people kept telling her to read the story of Job, but that it wasn't making much sense and it wasn't giving her comfort. Kushner analyzed the story to illustrate the mistaken assumptions that people make when wrestling theologically with bad things happening. Here's a quick version of the story of Job for anyone who's not familiar with it. Job is a good and faithful servant of God. The devil bets God that Job wouldn't be so faithful if he lost everything that God had bestowed upon him. So God takes it away. Job loses his house, his wealth, his health, and his children. Job's wife wants him to curse God. Job's friends blame him for having sinned. God speaks to Job at the end, telling him he could not possibly understand what it is like to be God. Then, considering his lesson taught, gives him double what he had at the start. He doesn't get back his original children, by the way. He just has more. Kushner points out that there are 3 assumptions in this story, but only 2 of them can be true. 1, God is all-powerful and causes everything to happen. 2, God is just and fair. And 3, Job is a good person. But if Job is good and God caused bad things to happen to him, then God cannot be just and fair, Job's wife's theory. If God is fair, then Job must be a bad person, Job's friend's theory. But Kushner believes in a third option. If Job is good and God is good, then God must not cause everything to happen and likely cannot intervene in our lives in the way we all might hope. Here are Kushner's theories to back this up. Some things are just random. Apparently, even Albert Einstein tried for many years to disprove quantum physics because it's based on the hypothesis that things happen at random. And Einstein couldn't believe that God would play dice with the cosmos. But I think the world needs physics. I remember discussing God with my dad, a physics engineer, one day after church, and he said, wouldn't it make more sense for God to create physics to sustain the universe than have the birds fall out of the sky if he lost concentration? Some trade-offs are necessary in nature. Kushner pointed out that the physical laws of nature are the very reason we can survive on this planet as a species. But sometimes those laws harm us. Gravity allows us to live on Earth, but can cause us to sink under the water, or fall off a mountain, or for something heavy to fall on us. For our bones to be flexible and light enough for us to be able to walk, they also have to be able to break under severe strain. The laws of nature do not make distinctions for good people. Kushner even suggests that a world in which good people were completely invulnerable and could jump out of windows and walk into traffic as cars were pushed aside would cause more problems than we have now. Pain is a survival mechanism. Pain tells us when something is wrong in our body. Those few born without the ability to feel pain have more injuries and often shorter lives. And then there's choice. If God could stop people from doing evil to one another, there would be no free will. God can send us prophets with advice on how God would like us to behave, but if we were forced to do only that, there would be no free will. What would it even mean to choose good if that was our only option? Kushner also believes that instead of being in opposition to God, our indignation at unfairness, as well as our compassion for suffering, is shared by God. God is on our side. This is Richard Rohr, a renowned Catholic priest and writer. In his book, Falling Upward, he talks about the spiritual growth aspects of suffering. He argues that we actually cannot experience the full spiritual growth that we are capable of until something awful happens in our lives. If you try to seek out spiritual growth on your own, you'll be seeking out resources that already fit with your schema. Your spiritual journey will be driven by your own ego. Only something that comes from outside you and completely shakes up your world can make you start asking the kinds of questions and seeking the kinds of answers that revolutionize your spiritual growth. He calls this the necessary stumbling stone. Rohr suggests there are two halves of life, the part before your stumbling stone and the part after. This here represents Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow is a big name in psychology. He suggested that our goals in life must be fulfilled in this order from bottom to top: physiological, safety, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. Nothing else matters if you can't fulfill your basic physiological needs to breathe, eat, and drink. You can't focus on love and belonging if you're not safe, and so on. Rohr suggests that the first half of life, you're trying to achieve the first 4 stages. You're getting your education, building a career, finding a spouse, raising children. Our ideas about the world tend to be more concrete. The tasks of the first half of life can keep us so busy that we don't even realize there is a second task. Then you hit your stumbling stone. It could be the loss of a loved one or some huge failure that leads you to struggle and grow and reevaluate your previous assumptions. This is where the transformation of spirituality happens. Rohr uses this analogy. In the first half of life, you create your container, your persona, and in the second half of life, you fill it. Rohr compares the journey of the second half of life to any great epic story, and maybe that's why such stories resonate so much with us as human beings. The stumbling stone pushes the protagonist out of their comfort zone. Without this circumstance, why would any of us leave our comfort zone? In this scene, Luke Skywalker has hit his stumbling stone. He must move on to something else. There is no home or family to go back to. In the epic story, the true identity of the protagonist is a mystery, and part of the journey is one of self-discovery. It's the same for our spiritual journeys. We are born not knowing what our true connection to God is, who we really are as spiritual beings. We don't remember our own creation or the feeling of being in God's presence. Why is this? Wouldn't it be a nicer place if we all realized how connected we are to each other and God, like people do during spiritual experiences? Rohr believes that part of life's journey is to allow this discovery. I once read a book called The Jeshua Channelings that proposed an interesting theory about why we have this amnesia about our true soul selves or anything beyond this life. The theory suggested that before creation, God could not grow and change. God was already ultimately loving and understanding. So God created the universe out of God's self and allowed the creations to forget where they came from. God's creations, being ignorant, could then learn and grow and eventually fully reconnect with their source, God, adding their new experience to the whole. This is supposedly the reason that there appears to be evil in the world. Evil could not be created out of good, but evil acts could arise out of ignorance and fear, from our lack of memory of who we truly are and where we truly came from. And this has to have been a theory out there already because it parallels completely with an alien race called the Changelings from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Ask my dad after the service if you want more details. All right, I feel like if we go any further down this line of thinking, we're all gonna have to go stare at the stars together or get seriously high. So let's go back to a story we're all familiar with, way back to the beginning. I feel like we need to reanalyze the story of Adam and Eve. As a child, all I took from this story was, ain't it awful they couldn't stay in paradise forever? But now I see it more as a coming-of-age story. Adam and Eve were like children in the Garden of Eden. Every time I see my own children run naked and unabashedly carefree in our backyard, I'm reminded of it. But when Adam and Eve bit the apple, they gained a knowledge of good and evil, like we all do when we hit our stumbling stone. We gain a knowledge of evil as we really feel the pain of the world. But we also gain a knowledge of good as people rally round us. We can never go back to our innocence, and we mourn for it. But there is so much more to the wide world and to life than what we receive in our Garden of Eden. And we'll talk a little more later about what we get in return. But now I need to pause for a moment of psychology. Okay, so pain and suffering are great for spiritual growth. That's nice, but who really cares about that when you're suffering? Really, I mean, can't we all just try to live happy lives? Well, the evidence in psychology seems to suggest that pursuing happiness makes us less happy. Even stopping to assess how happy you are actually decreases your happiness. Like when you're in a state of flow where you're really engaged in something you love doing, you're too immersed in the experience to think about whether or not you're happy, but afterwards, people describe it as the ultimate emotional experience. When we search for happiness, we tend to try to achieve strong positive emotions like joy, enthusiasm, or excitement. But this goal actually undermines our enjoyment of normal, pleasant experiences like finding that pull-through in the parking lot of the grocery store. Researchers found that when people were trying to make themselves as happy as possible, they actually experienced less joy watching a figure skater win a gold medal. They were just disappointed it wasn't more exciting. We also tend to focus on ourselves when we look for happiness, but evidence shows that being self-focused is more likely to lead to unhappiness and depression. One study found that people who placed a greater value on happiness reported more loneliness when measured over the next 2 weeks. And in a follow-up study where they randomly assigned people to value happiness more or less, the happiness value group were lonelier. So this kind of sucks, right? First I tell you we're doomed to suffer, and then I tell you not even to try to be happy. What we need right now is a dose of emotional agility, a concept studied by Dr. Susan David and discussed in her book, Emotional Agility. If we say there are 7 basic emotions, joy, surprise, anger, sadness, fear, contempt, and disgust, at least 5 of these are pretty unpleasant to experience. And yet, we have these emotions because they helped us survive millions of years of natural selection. So clearly they serve a useful purpose in our lives. Recognizing this makes it easier to accept all your emotions, and people who are really good at this have emotional agility. All right, here's her book, plus another book that I highly recommend for anyone who has emotions. These books explain that emotionally agile people still have all the same emotions as the rest of us, but they face their emotions, whether they're distorted or not, with curiosity and compassion instead of critical self-judgment. Instead of thinking something like, if I was a better person, I never would have had a thought like that. I'd be happy for my friend, not jealous. They detach from their emotions, thinking things like, they're just thoughts and emotions, not who I am. This allows them to focus on their core values and goals when determining their behavior instead of their ever-changing emotional states. And it keeps even small choices in line with their goals. I've always found that it's my feelings about my negative feelings that are the hardest to deal with. So you can imagine that accepting your negative emotions actually leads to fewer negative emotions. Yep. Okay, so we need to accept all of our negative emotions. But for the people here who really like being happy, I have some good news for you. Going through pain may actually allow us to better experience pleasure. It turns out that the parts of your brain responsible for pain and pleasure actually overlap. Dr. Anna Lemke, doctor of Dopamine Nation, suggests the feelings are a bit like two sides of a scale, which our brain is always trying to keep in balance. Pleasurable activities cause your brain to release a chemical called dopamine. If dopamine goes way up on a regular basis, your brain tries to balance out by decreasing the amount of dopamine that it puts out. But unfortunately, this leads us to take less pleasure in things. This is why we tend to overestimate how happy positive life events will make us. We think getting our next big promotion or moving to a new place will make us happier, but we forget that our brains eventually adapt to new circumstances. Even winning the lottery doesn't make a difference to people's overall happiness in the long run. But it also works the other way. Experiencing pain can lead our brains to compensate by pumping out dopamine. When scientists asked participants to hold their hand in a bucket of ice water, which can feel very painful, then offered them a sweet treat, people who had first experienced pain enjoyed their treat more and found it more flavorful. And when they got people to actually immerse their whole bodies in 14 degrees Celsius water for an hour, their blood dopamine concentrations increased by 250%. It's the reason you can get a runner's high, or that people do polar bear dips in the winter and then do them again the next year. I've heard of people actually curing their depression with daily ice water plunges. And the effects aren't just for physical pain. When psychologists surveyed participants about seriously stressful life events, we're talking death of a loved one, major disaster like an earthquake or a fire, serious financial insecurity, parent divorce, that sort of thing, those who had experienced 2 to 4 of these life events had increased life satisfaction in comparison to people who hadn't had any of the stressors. So it seems that when it comes to the pleasure-pain balance, we literally can't have one without the other. Getting spiritual about it, some people even hypothesize that one of the reasons spirits incarnate on earth at all is for the opportunity to experience the entire gamut of human emotions, including the negative ones, that one cannot fully appreciate what it is to be happy and loved without also understanding the opposite feelings. Personally, I plan to fully enjoy the pleasure part of the balance whenever the opportunity arises, even if it means full-on dancing down the grocery store aisles when a good song comes on. I mean, it was a long pandemic. Continuing on the spiritual vein, I always enjoy taking a look at Buddhism because it has a different commentary on emotions than Christianity. Buddha is credited with saying that life is suffering, We've probably all heard this quote. But what Buddha actually said was, life is dukkha, which has no real English translation. A more literal translation of dukkha would mean something like temporary or does not satisfy. We will all experience mental and physical pain at some point due to inevitable stresses like old age, sickness, and death. Dukkha can also be talking about happiness, success, or even bliss, though. It's not that we're not meant to enjoy these things. It's just that, as we have learned, they are all impermanent and will eventually pass, which can feel quite distressing. Then there's the existential suffering of being affected by outside forces, which we can't control. That's definitely something we all struggle with after a loss. So how do we deal with this in a Christian context? Harold Kushner, the rabbi from the beginning, believes there's a need to change the questions we ask when facing a crisis. Considering that we now know that bad things will eventually happen to us all, and that negative feelings are normal, instead of asking, what did I do to deserve this, or why is this happening to me, we can say, since this is happening to me, what do I do now, and who is there to help me do it? If God doesn't actually interfere in the laws of nature as Kushner proposes, then you might think that he would say prayer is pointless. But Kushner believes prayer does work when the purpose of your prayer is to commune with God and seek strength and love so that you can continue to face your struggles. Humans have overcome unbelievable struggles when given no other choice. They scrape together the inner fortitude to keep going when it seems they have nothing left. Kushner believes prayer is a way to tap this resource of inner fortitude. Kushner also believes that our life events don't necessarily have a meaning, but that we can choose to give them meaning in the choices we make going forward. But how do we create this meaning? What is it we gain from going through Rohr's supposed epic journey of self-discovery? Rohr says we reach a second simplicity, one where we understand spirituality on so many more levels, but that we can also enjoy old rituals and stories for what they are. In the second half of life, we gain an ability to hold both positive and negative within us simultaneously, rather than trying to push the negative away. We see our common humanity with others, rather than needing to feel superior. We stop thinking of God and religion as something one person can know better than the others, and start seeing a wider version of God and spirituality. He says it's like arriving at the shore instead of worshiping the specific boat that got you there. In my opinion, this is when you can be a true mentor to other people. Instead of being the kind of person who could be an influencer on social media, you become the kind of person who quietly and deeply influences one person at a time. I have been mentored and have had the privilege of mentoring others in the painful aspects of life. It can be so comforting to talk to someone who just understands the negative feelings and can show you that you are not alone and that life can be sweet again. I have a friend who suffered a lot. She sent me a message expressing frustration that she needed so much help from other people. She missed the days when she was the one helping others. She saw her friends living their lives like normal and able to do all the things she wished she could do. Then I had an idea. Here's what I wrote to her. What if this time in your life is your undergrad, master's, and PhD in suffering, in your specific area of suffering? And just like being a student, you can't start making money and contributing to scientific knowledge until you've done your time learning. So you may feel like you're behind in contributing as your friends get one-year college diplomas in life's struggles. But when you come out the other end, you will have a bigger impact on other people's lives because of it. And it's an education you would never choose, of course, but your journey to make the world a better place is not on pause because of it. I think Harold Kushner said it best in one of his most quoted lines. I am a more sensitive person, a more effective pastor, a more sympathetic counselor because of Aaron's life and death. And I would give it up in a second if I could have my son back. A good example of holding positive and negative together. This is my friend Gina. She's been through a lot in life as well, and she posted this on Facebook. I recently shared how my challenges slowly led me to greater wisdom, strength, and tools to cope and thrive. But it wasn't by washing all the pain away in one go. It took time, patience, space to feel, and tons of individual, community, and spiritual support. To be honest, I wouldn't change a thing. Would I go back and do it all over again? Nah. But all that I've been through led me to the people, places, and spaces that held me when I needed and further inspired my mission of bringing more love, intimacy, and healing into the world. I vibe with the energy of the wounded healer, my pain inspiring my contributions to the world. But I'm not attached to my trauma. It was my teacher, a steep climb on the path. Some of it may never be forgotten or even forgiven, but it doesn't hold me back. It shaped me, but it's not me. It was the catalyst for my soul, heart, mind, and body to start speaking the same language, and for that, I am grateful. Doesn't this sound a lot like what Paul was saying in the Bible reading? Paul asked God to relieve his suffering, and God didn't. But Paul ended up being strong in his weakness because of it. I just can't seem to get through a sermon without referring to a near-death experience. It just feels to me like people coming back from the brink of death with messages from the spirit world are the closest thing that we have in this time and place to prophets. This quote doesn't fit with Kushner's view of God's power, but it's an interesting perspective. During the review of my life, Jesus repeatedly allowed me to see both the immediate and distant effects of an event. I was able to appreciate and understand how each event spread through time and space, initiating a cascade of other events from which something of beauty and worth always emerged. To make something one of God's most astonishing gifts is his ability to use time to heal and redeem, to make something beautiful later out of something that appears ugly now. Does God really work all things together for our good? During my life review, as I witnessed beauty emerging from every event, my faith in God's promise shifted from a somewhat vague theological hope into complete trust. I understood that he genuinely does make everything beautiful in his time. Even all the near-death experience stories in which people are told, "This is not your time," or "Your work isn't done yet," suggest that there is some sort of plan, something we're supposed to accomplish in our lives. But that's more comforting to the people who the plan seems to be working out for. Maybe Richard Rohr's theory fits better here. He said, God must say, after each failure of ours, "Oh, here's a great opportunity. Let's see how we can work with this." After our ego-inflating successes, God surely says, "Well, nothing new or good is going to happen here." Failure and suffering are the great equalizers and levelers among humans. Success is just the opposite. So here's my second simplicity in 2 parts. 1, I believe the main benefit of suffering is that it helps you better understand others who suffer. And 2, we're all in this together. When Kushner visited bereaved families after a disaster and asked them the single most important thing that helped them cope, they all had the same answer: community. Friends, neighbors, church members, total strangers coming out of the woodwork to help them. I have absolutely experienced this, and it's one of the most life-changing things that ever happened to me. During my darkest time, after my son Jake died, a community larger than I ever imagined I had came together and supported me and my family. We were overwhelmed by the generous donations that allowed us to take time off work without suffering financially. But it's also the individual stories. A man that my sister met on the plane trip home from Jake's hospital donated $100 to our GoFundMe. The chef at the airport in BC who found out we were coming home without Jake gave us a free meal. Friends coordinated meals for us or had us over when we couldn't bear to be in our own house. Strangers became friends and offered babysitting or memorial opportunities. People just cared, and it kept going and going and going. Even years later, a stranger in another town made a mailbox to heaven for Jake's grave. Another stranger made a sign for the mailbox. The mother-in-law of a friend spent 72 hours making a quilt out of Jake's baby clothes, and then did it a second time out of the rest. There are just too many stories to tell in one sitting. Now, I want to acknowledge here how very privileged we were. Many people who go through tough times, especially when those tough times go on for years, are not able to get out into the community and make the connections with people who could help them. These are the people we can keep an eye out for as we go through our lives, especially once we've experienced suffering. If you see a cryptically sad post on Facebook or social media, you can follow up with a private message to check on the person. If someone mentions their sister is going through the same thing you went through 5 years ago, you can offer to talk to her. Maybe you can admit some of your really negative emotions so that she doesn't feel so alone in it. You can check in on someone who you know used to struggle to see how they're doing now. A small act of kindness and understanding may have ripple effects in other people's lives that no human could have foreseen. In this life, we'll never really know why bad things happen. Whether from dopamine or dukkha, a life of everlasting happiness is just not possible. After Jake died, my trust in the universe went way down, but my trust in humanity skyrocketed. Life can be so hard, but the fact that I have an entire world of my human brothers and sisters here living it with me, getting our education together, makes it a lot easier to face. They continue to pick me up when I need it, and I will spend the rest of my life picking them up as well. So, as you go forge through your own epic story, try to face what you feel with gentleness, learn what you can from your experience, and use it to walk this journey together. Amen. Dear God, whatever the benefits or trade-offs of suffering, it is an awful thing to endure. Please help us to have compassion for those who suffer and use our own experiences to allow us to give understanding and support to those who are suffering right now, whether far away and helped through donations or up close and helped through our daily gestures of love. Amen. When we look back on our lives, the things that will feel important to us will be the relationships we had and the ways we left the world better than we found it. One opportunity to change the world is in your offering, whether electronically or at the offering plates at the back of the sanctuary. God, please bless these gifts that go to the running of the church and the Mission and Service Fund, which allows us to help people who we will never meet, but who are still our brothers and sisters. Amen. Thank you for enduring this suffering service today. As we all, in our own time, experience the highs and lows that life brings, may you view yourself and others with compassion. May you question and seek answers as you feel ready. And remember, we have each other. We are not alone. Thanks be to God.